Hello again. I'm back with another clock to repair, and this one is a bit different for me. One of my subscribers reached out to me and suggested I might be interested in repairing some clocks of different brands than what I have been seeing in the past. And one of the names he mentioned was an Ingraham, and I was able to go out and come up with one. I did some research on it and learned that Ingraham was founded in 1831 by Elias Ingraham. The company's had many name changes over the years. From 1884 to 1958, it was known as the E. Ingraham Company. It was sold in 1967 and renamed Ingraham Industries. I received this clock in a non-working condition, and when I look at the back of it, there's quite a bit of play and looseness in the power cord here, and I'm reluctant to plug it in until I open it up and see just what's going on with it. It's also missing the set knob, so I'll have to scramble around to try to find one of those. On the bottom of it, I'm seeing a date code. I don't know if you can see it or not, but it says 636, which tells me this was made in June of 1936. The case is in remarkably good condition, considering it's, 84 years old, something like that. And I'm not certain if someone over the years has refinished this. I do see on the bottom more modern type green felt pads, whether they were applied separately or as part of a restoration, I don't know. But what I'm going to do first with it, remove this back plate. I see a couple of screws missing from here, but there's two main ones here. We'll loosen them up and get that out and see how it goes. I should also mention that on the dial it reads Ingraham self-starting, and on the information plate on the back over here it gives a model number which is SST7, and I'm thinking that SST stands for self-starting. I also stand corrected, it's 86 years old, and in any event, let me get set up and I'll start taking this one apart. I'm going to undo these two and the clock should come right out of the case. One. And two. Okay, that's interesting. There we go. All right, this connection seems pretty decent actually. It's screwed on. This one looks a little bit loose. I think it's safe to try to plug this in now. I'm also noticing there's a bell here. And what's interesting is that on the back of the plate, the only writing says to hand set for adjusting the time, but there's no mention of having a chime. I'm assuming this may just chime on the half hour perhaps. Anyway, let me get this plugged in. Okay, I have it plugged in, but not turned on. Let's flip it on and see what happens. And this one's running. Oh, it just stopped. That's interesting. Very interesting. Let me turn it on and off again. Okay, it's not running. It started to, as you saw. So I'll have to look to figure out a way to open it up, and don't know what could have happened, but hopefully I'll figure it out. The first thing I want to do though is I'm going to remove the wire from the clock. Just a couple of nuts here are holding the connection. That way I can get the wire out from the case and the plate. It's pretty much a modern type of a plug as compared to one of the old Bakelite ones, which I could have unscrewed to get this off. So let me work on that next. The wire is removed, and in looking at it, it's very different from any of the clocks that I've been working on in the past. It's a lot more complex the way the gears are set up. There are some springs in here. It's definitely going to be a challenge taking this one apart. This is likely the rotor, which is quite large compared to any of the other ones I've been working on. And my first concern with the fact that it started to run and then stopped is when the power went in, did I burn out the rotor? I am not seeing a coil in here, but let me check with an ohm meter to see if I have a continuity of the circuit here. So let me set that up. I just have to turn on the ohm meter, and when I touch the leads to the contacts here, if everything's intact, I should see numbers flashing. All right, so the circuit's intact, which means in theory, this clock should be restorable. So what I'm going to do next is, well, what I usually do is I'm going to remove the dial, the rim, the hands, the glass, all of that. There's some tabs here that are bent over this back plate, and I just have to undo them to get it off. Let me work on that, and then we'll continue. I've bent all the tabs out except the last one. And let's see how easy this one is to get out. That wasn't too bad. Got the glass and the rim. Next, I'm going to work on taking off the hands. I'm not sure yet if this is threaded or a friction grip, so I got to take a closer look at it before I try to get that off. It looks like it's a friction grip, so I should be able to pry it off. Definitely a bit tight. Okay, there's one. We'll try the same thing for the minute hand. And for the hour hand, just put a piece of cardboard. I don't want to scratch the dial. This one's a lot tighter. Starting to move. Okay. The dial should come off. There are some tabs bent holding the dial on. There we go. Okay, the next step is going to be just removing this whole thing from this plate. I have the 4 nuts here, so let me undo those and then we'll continue. But before I undo these, what I'm going to do is take some photos of how these gears are positioned in here, because once this plate comes off, odds are this next little plate will come with it. And if any of these get dislodged without my knowing where they're sitting, I'll have a real hard time figuring out how to put it back together. So let me work on some pictures and then I'll be ready to undo the nuts. I've taken my photos, I've removed the 4 nuts. Let's see about getting this top plate off. Okay. Oh, some washers here fell off, which apparently were underneath each of these nuts. I didn't notice that. Here's another one. Okay. We have some little dried out, looks like rubber washers here. I'll have to remove those, and then I'm pretty sure that once I lift this plate up, that's going to free up all the gears that are underneath here. So let me see how easy that's going to be to get loose. As soon as I tried to touch these washers to wiggle them or unscrew them off, they just crumbled. They're all dried out. So I'm just going to have to kind of pull them off and come up with some sort of thin rubber spacer, grommet, washer, something to fit in here. So let me get all of this off, clean it up, and then we'll continue. I came up with a couple of things. One is I found some washers that if I use the small little washer that was here, plus this, it's the same thickness as what was here previously. So that should work to keep the plate the proper distance away. And I also came up with a set knob, which was missing. And I'm watching as I rotate it. So I'm not quite sure yet if that's supposed to chime on the half hour, on the hour. Obviously it's, I think, just one chime. I don't think it's going to give you each hour. But nonetheless, I'm happy I found this, kind of interesting. And now I'll go back to work to trying to get this top plate off. Another thing I'm noticing, I'll try to show it, as I start to try to lift up this plate, all these gears are kind of moving up with it. They're all sticky to the plate. I'm going to put just a drop or two of liquid wrench on each of these pivots to try to loosen up whatever gunky oil is holding it together. I don't want the gears to come off with the plate. Also, there's a spring here, which is attached to a post that's riveted to the plate. And then it's connected to this little bar over here. So I'm going to look to remove this spring first. So I'll do that. I'll work on trying to lubricate it, and then we'll continue from there. A change in plans. Instead of removing the plate, I decided to reattach the power cord. I want to take another look to see if anything's actually moving inside, and let me show you what I came up with. I have it plugged in. I'll turn it on, and that gear starts to move and then stops. And if I nudge it a little bit, it starts moving and then stops. So whether the gears are just sticky and need a good cleaning and lubricating to get this working, I'm not sure. I still plan to remove this plate, get everything apart, and I'll go back to working on that. As you can see, I've managed to remove this plate. It came off from the top, and when you flip it over, I have this arrangement. And then this setup. And what I'm going to do now is take some photos of this and then gradually remove one gear at a time to try to get a good record of how everything is supposed to go back together. So I'll work on that and then we'll continue. On the top plate, this gear seems to be attached with a little piece holding the stem in. I can't get that off, but by tilting it over, I can get this gear out. The rest of them are all riveted into place, so I can't get these out of here. So I'm just going to soak this in an ultrasonic with some hot soapy water, clean up all the grease and oil that's on here. I'll try to show you how it comes apart on the bottom plate. Have this piece here, and then this, that. Whoop. This is what rings the bell. it's that comes off as well. And what I want to do with this next is I'd like to figure out a way to remove the rotor. But what I might do first, now that everything's separate, I'll reattach the power cord here and see if this rotor is actually functioning. So let me set up the cord and then we'll continue. Okay, I've got it plugged in. I'm going to turn it on. This is the output gear on the rotor. And it's not running. I'm finding that if I turn it this way though, give it a tap, it starts to run. That seems to make it stop. We definitely have an intermittent thing here. So what I'm going to have to try to do is figure a way to get the rotor off, open it up, clean out the old oil, and try to relubricate it and hope that that fixes it. This is really a very unusual design. What I assumed at first is there's a couple of nuts here holding this plate, which is what holds the rotor in position. But when I try to turn them, this entire post rotates. And what I've discovered is this post actually screws into this half. And if I grab hold of it with a vice grip, I'm able to undo it. And you can see the top half of that post spinning out. Look at that. Now I'm going to do the same thing to the other side. Once I have the rotor out, then we'll continue. As it turns out, I've just realized all I have to do now is slide this across. And there's an incredible amount of oil coating the rotor here. But it's out. Quite the mess. Now I do see a small hole right here, and I'm thinking that might be how new oil can be introduced. So let me take a closer look and see just how far in I can get with this. This hole is definitely gives you access to add oil to the rotor. What I'm going to do first is just clean up all this old gunky oil. It's really coating it. Then I'll fill it up with liquid wrench, let it sit for 24 hours. Drain it out, and then fill it up again with 3-in-1 oil and let that sit for 24 hours. That's been my routine in trying to repair rotors in the past. So I'll get to work on that, and once that's been completed, I will return. And one other thing I'm realizing that doesn't make sense is why would there be a hole in a rotor? That is where oil is going to be able to leak out from, which is what all this dried up stuff is probably from here. It was coating the back of it as well. If I'm able to get it running after cleaning it out, I will probably look to close this hole up with some epoxy glue. So for now though, I'll get to work on cleaning it out. I'll show you what I've done so far. I've cleaned it out with the liquid wrench, got out as much as I could, did the same thing with the 3-in-1 oil. I have it plugged in, and what I found is that if I hold it in an upright position, the rotor's working. I turn it on its side, it stops. If I turn it downwards, it starts working again. Now this is the position that it sits in the clock. So hopefully I can get this one running, or if it doesn't run or it stops periodically, if I give it a good little shake this way, that might get it going again. But it's close enough for me to proceed cleaning up the rest of the gears and looking to reassemble everything. So I'll work on that and then we'll continue. I've cleaned and lubricated all the gears, the plates, all the moving parts. One thing I noticed that I want to point out is I see on the back of the rotor is stamped 1048. So I'm pretty certain this was manufactured in October of 48. So I'm thinking that that 636 date code on the bottom of the case, perhaps that's not a date code. Maybe it's some sort of stock number or something. In any event, I'm going to reposition all the gears and then put the two plates together. That's going to take quite some time, and for the most part, I'm just going to reverse the steps how I initially took it apart, and once everything's back together, I will continue. As I expected, it did take quite a long time for me to get everything back together, but I did. Everything's in the correct position, the plates are screwed back together, and you can see how everything's moving when I turn the set knob. So the next step is for me to reposition the rotor back under this plate. What I'm waiting for first, however, is I placed a small piece of metal tape under the hole and then sealed it up with some epoxy glue. So I'm waiting for this to set. Then I'll insert it and we'll give it a test run. I've reattached the rotor. I have it plugged in. Let's turn it on and see what happens. And I hope you can see it. It seems to be running. What I want to do next is I'll seat the hands on the front of this and let it run for a while. And that way I'll know if it's really working properly or not. So let me set it up for that and then we'll give it a spin. I've seated the hands and it's running, but what's really strange is the fact that the ringer is continuous. I mean, really strange. And I may have assembled it, not quite exactly how I took it apart, but I really looked closely at all the photos I took, and I'm pretty certain it's put together the way I took it apart. And if I'm unable to figure this out, I will probably remove the knocker here. The unusual thing is nowhere on the clock does it say that it's a chime clock. And I'm perfectly fine if it just runs as a timepiece. So I'll take a closer look at it, see what I can come up with. But if I can't figure it out, I'll lose the chime. I'm going to try to explain what I've done here. Basically, I've done three things. The first thing is, I'll show you how the clock looks right now. The first thing is I totally disassembled it and checked it with the photos I took and then reassembled it, and it was put together correctly the first time. Nothing was off. Yet the hammer kept hitting the bell, continuously. So I adjusted the hammer so that it wouldn't hit the bell, and set the clock up as you see here. And after about 8 or 9 hours, the clock just froze. It stopped running. At that point, I totally removed the hammer, and now it's been running for about 15 or 16 hours, which is encouraging. And the other thing I've noticed, and here's the hammer that I took off. And now, when I turn the clock, either on its back, which was the front, it seems to continue to run. If you recall earlier on, depending on how I tilted the rotor, it would start and stop. But I'm comfortable enough now that this is working properly. I'm going to proceed with cleaning up the dial, the rim, the hands. Where's the dial? Here. And then work on reassembling it. So I'll get started on that and then we'll continue. Yep, put this down here. And one other thing I can do before cleaning up the glass and the rim and everything is I'm going to place this plate. I'll take off the hands and position this back over the clock as well. I've cleaned up the dial and the glass, And the rim has some kind of a lacquer or varnish coating it, so I didn't use a brass cleaner that would tend to remove it and kind of dull it up even more. Hands are cleaned. I positioned the plate back over the mechanism, and the next step is to seat the dial and the hands. This has a little tab that I have to bend in to refit it again. Okay, next we'll work on the hands. Start with the hour hand first. And the minute hand, everything on the 12. And the second hand. Okay. Then the glass in the rim. Now I have to work on bending these tabs back over the plate. Let me do that, and then we'll continue. I've secured the rim to the plate, and the next step is to clean up the wood case before I place the whole clock back in it. Now the finish on this one, as I had said at the start, is really in very good condition. So I'm just going to look to clean it up a little bit, and then just treat it with my the wax that I use, the Howard's feed and wax. I'm not going to bother with the Restore finish. Again, I think it's looking quite good. So I'll work on polishing this up, and then I'll be ready to insert the clock back into it. I finished waxing the case. I think it came out looking good, has a nice shine to it. So the next step is to insert the clock back into it, and that should pretty much finish things up. So let me get to work on that. One other thing I have to do first, though, is I'm going to have to remove the power cord from here in order to snake the wire through the back plate into the back of the clock case, that is. So something else for me to do. I removed the power cord, snaked the wire through the case, and then reattached it. Now I can seat the mechanism back into the case. And then slip the back plate Now I just have to insert the 2 screws here and my set knob, and it'll be completed. There you have it, the finished product, an Ingraham Mantle Clock. It's from 1948. I have it plugged in. Let me turn it on, make sure that it's still running, which it is. This was a very unusual one for me. It was quite difficult, very complex mechanism. I'm not even sure how eager I am to tackle another Ingraham. And again, most unusual, the fact that on the dial or on the back plate, no mention of it that it was supposed to be a chime clock, yet that's what I discovered once I opened it up. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video, and that pretty much wraps things up. Bye for now.